Suspended Animation Podcast. No different to everybody that is on the fence about doing a podcast. Jump into it. Everyone has a story. Feel free to share yours. Make your mistakes. It's okay.
Yep.
We're all in this together. We're learning. Like I said, these major companies like Libsyn and Spotify, they don't have the answers either. Why would we expect you to have the answer? So let's all hop on and make magic together.
Welcome to Playing with Perspective, the Suspended Animation Podcast, where we hear real stories from real people and we tackle all sorts of fun topics in the areas of business, marketing, entrepreneurship, mindset, the arts, and, well, life itself. It's amazing what you'll pick up. Thanks for joining us. Good morning, everyone. Another great episode of Playing with Perspective, the Suspended Animation Podcast. I've got a real treat. I've got one of the members of the Good Ole Boys radio show all the way from the US. LeTroy Gardner is in the house. How you doing, LeTroy?
Doing good, Darren. Pleasure to be on the Suspended Animation Podcast. I know we're doing a role reversal tonight.
Yep, I love that. It's all good. Part of the podcast culture.
Oh, yeah.
And we met on a great app called Podcast Match. It's a great podcast matching app where it matches guests and hosts. So I highly recommend it. Check it out. But we're going to be chatting today all about LeTroy's radio show, The Good Ole Boys. And he's doing that together with a whole group of people. It's an urban adult contemporary program that airs music from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s with the occasional hit from today. The show also incorporates hip-hop from the 80s and 90s, which has not been prevalent with mainstream urban audiences. But as the people who grew in those decades get older, it makes sense to play that music as well. So the show is hosted by the Mario Washington, Kittles, LeTroy Gardner, and Gran Wiz. I hope I've got all that right, who bring their unique perspectives and humor to the show. They discuss a range of topics from social media issues to pop culture with comedic as well as dramatic takes. The show is described by many as a cinematic journey inside the mind of Black males. The Good Ole Boys radio show is a great way to relax and enjoy some classic music while also hearing from four intelligent and entertaining hosts. So LeTroy has always been captivated by radio, music, and storytelling, turning his passion into a successful self-made career that resonates with audiences around the globe. His journey began well before the digital age, with early experiences like recording his favorite songs on Fisher-Price recorders during BET's Rap City and interning at a local TV station in high school. LeTroy's innovative approach to storytelling continues to push the boundaries of radio and podcasting. So LeTroy, welcome to the show, my man.
Oh, thank you, Darren. Pleasure to be here. Whoa, wow, that's a lot. Sometimes you forget, the entire story because you're in the midst of doing it. And wow, when you have somebody else reading it, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to hear your own journey back.
Oh, yeah.
And you say, wow, that's nice the way that flows. Or have I done all that? That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to talk about the show. And obviously we'll get into you and your podcast a bit later on as well. But tell us more about the Good Ole Boys and how you guys started, how you met. Where did this all start?
Yeah, so myself, Q, Mario, and Gran Wiz, Wafiq, we all met in college at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. And we were all communication majors, mass communication majors. And Mario was like one of the head honchos with the campus radio station.
Wow.
And in order for me to get on the radio station, I had to go talk to him. And I had this idea. I want to do a hip hop show. It ended up being called The Dungeon. And he was like a matchmaker. So he put me together with another guy named Kelly Usher, who was a huge hip hop fan. So we did that show. And then he had a show with two friends, Brian and Thomas, called The Royal Palace. And Q had a show of his own called The Laboratory.
My God.
And Gran Wiz had his own show. But as we all graduated a few years after, we just all had that hunger to continue what we started in college. And instead, like I had this idea for a show at the time. I was doing it with the Mario Washington and another friend, Kimberly Shaw, called the Good Ole Boys. We are kind of doing like a lot of skits
Yep.
more so than anything. But then Mario was like, why don't we do it with four guys? Why don't we bring it back? And that's when we recruited Gran Wiz and Q. And since
Uh,
2010, we've been pretty much been chugging along.
that's awesome. And isn't it independent radio show, or how does that all work?
Yes, it's independently produced. We handle everything in house. And I'll say, especially during the mid like 2003, 2004, 2005, we were entertaining the thoughts of getting on Sirius XM.
Yeah.
But at first, we felt like, why don't we get on some internet stations and some terrestrial stations? So I pretty much handled that work as far as outreach and communication.
Mhm.
And we were on stations in the UK and Japan, Australia, Germany, Belize, Jamaica, and then some of the internet stations in the US. We would pretty much record our episodes, handle the post production, send it over to each station with the description, and we'd send it with commercials and without. So it just depended on what each station needed at the time. And we did that for several years. We kind of reached a point where we started talking to a syndicator, and the syndicator loved it, but what he was charging was beyond our budget. So we kind of slowed down a little bit, and then this thing called podcasting started taking over, and we shifted focus and started producing the show in podcasting form instead of radio.
Do you do it just in audio, or do you do it in video as well?
It's just an audio.
Audio, yeah, yeah. That's awesome. And it's really about the music that you guys grew up with, and the music that you're passionate about.
Exactly. So I'd say, especially myself and Mario, we're both like old school heads. He goes a little bit further back to me. He likes a lot more of the 60s
Wow.
soul music than I do, but I'm like 70s, 80s, and 90s. And from a creative standpoint, a lot of the music that I was listening to would spark ideas. So I would create shows based on songs I would hear a lot of times.
Wow.
And then I would craft the entire show around one song with other music tied to it. So say like if my favorite R&B song of all time is Tony's Anniversary, and
Oh,
we're doing
it's one of my favorites as well. I absolutely love that song. It's a long one, about 14,
uh-huh,
15
yeah.
minutes. Yeah,
I love that version, the
love that
9 to
song.
10-minute version.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Love
Trust
that.
me. Yeah, so if I'm creating a show on getting married, then I'm going to have that on.
Yeah.
And then based on the other segments in the show, we're going to create a playlist around that. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, it was so much fun. It was taking the exercise that you explained in my intro, where I'm recording songs from my favorite TV shows and crafting playlists. And I just made a grown up version of it by creating episodes for the Good Ole Boys.
That's kind of cool. So every episode has its own theme, and all the music
Right.
around it is curated and sits beautifully to tell a story about that theme.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. And funny enough, like Tony, they're huge in the States. Like they're always big, but I think they're one of the greatest bands, but they're a little bit underrated.
Well, Raphael Sadiq left the group in, I want to say 1997, and he started doing some solo work,
Yeah.
producing, and he also formed another group, Lucy Pearl, with Ali Shaheed Muhammad from Tribe Called Quest and Don Robinson from En Vogue.
Oh,
But last year, right around this time, last October, they went on tour. So it was his first time reuniting with Tony and
wow.
performing those songs since he left the group.
Man.
And they didn't allow us to bring our phones into the show, but it was an amazing, amazing sight because I didn't think it would ever happen.
That would be amazing. And funny, the power of music. Like you're taking me right back now, just by mentioning the name of that song. I used to listen to Tony and that song in the car and all over the place. And you take me right back to God knows how many years ago when I was into that song and into that music. So it's quite amazing, the power of music. So tell us a bit more about the stuff that you guys play. Do you have a particular angle or particular type of artist, or how do you choose your themes for the week?
Yeah, so it's pretty much especially back then, we were getting celebrity interviews pretty much every week. So that was something I was also instrumental in, was booking the interviews.
Wow.
So say like if we had, trying to think of a guest that the music related to that particular guest. So say like we had Donnell Jones, which we did interview,
Wow.
then obviously we're going to play Where I Want to Be. So then the show topic was going to be around a guy that stepped out on his relationship and was apologetic in the end. So yeah, we're going to end up creating a show around that, because the interview with him is going to kind of touch on it as well. Like Mario's doing the interview, he's going to ask him what led to the creation of that song. So then we're going to have a whole show kind of tied into that theme. So it just pretty much all kind of fit like a perfect match.
And how do you find your guests? Or do they find you?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So in the beginning, I was pretty much going on MySpace and Facebook or any other social media platform and just finding email addresses and sending, not cold calling, but cold emailing
Yeah. Yeah.
to cold emailing and seeing if I would get a response.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it would be a manager or a publicist that would respond. And we were pretty professional with what we were doing with our operation. So a lot of times that would lead to that publicist just sending over their other clients. So say if somebody's a publicist I still work with to this day. So say Angelo Ellerby, I've gotten people like Wadeen, the head of Rough Riders. I've gotten him. I've gotten the head of Def Jam. I've gotten a lot of people from him. I had the famous DJ Patty Jackson on about a month and a half ago. They were doing a tribute to the late, great Frankie Beverly. They were naming a street after him.
Wow.
So if Angelo has a client, I can pretty much guarantee that I'm going to interview that person. Patra, the reggae dancehall legend. Like he represents so many artists that I built that relationship.
Yep.
And whenever he needs me, I'm there. Same with a few other people in the industry. We just had that built-in relationship over a decade. But then there'll be times where, like you said, people will find me and I'll be surprised. So some of the local North Carolina hip hop artists like Caesar Camache and people from the Little Brother camp, they would reach out and they want to come on the show, and I'm just like, come on, let's do it.
That's great.
And I know you're the same way. I like interviewing famous people, but I'm cool interviewing whoever. Everybody has a story, and I'm just interested in hearing good stories and providing a microphone for people to be informative and entertaining.
Yep. I so agree with you. Like, there are some people that love chasing only the big ticket guests. And for me, as great as that is, I prefer just to interview everybody that's got an interesting angle and always try and find the gold in that person and in that story, because everybody's got something to share
Oh yeah.
and all learn from
Oh, yeah.
whatever stage we're at. So I think that's a really good point.
And I would say it becomes exhausting booking the celebrities, because if your show depends on that,
Yeah.
and it becomes you hit those dry spots, then there's no way your show can survive. Like, I know the odds of me being able to book a celebrity for a weekly show, 52 episodes, that's pretty slim at this point, especially with social media.
Yeah.
A lot of these celebrities can just hop on social media and get their message out, or a lot of them host their own podcast. So they'll just do their own podcast. So yeah, if I get 10 to 12 celebrity interviews a year, that's great. And then I'll just fill it in with other interesting stories.
Love it. And so, as I understand it, you guys have just the one podcast together, or do you have a few different podcasts that you guys run?
So we have a network. It's called Forecast Media. It started as a result of the success of the Good Ole Boys, because Mario also worked for a radio station as their manager. A lot of the students from our alma mater went to that station to intern. And as a result, it was basically a funneling system, and they still wanted to do shows. So they would create their own podcast. So it just seemed like a no-brainer that we just create a network.
Yep.
So we're producing 7 podcasts and 2 radio shows.
Wow, that's crazy. And who does all the production work? Is that all you?
A lot of us, we're able to do a lot of self-production, but then we'll lean on Mario. He's like the executive producer.
Okay.
So even with Stop, Look, and Listen, the show that you were on, where I interview people, I do a lot of pre-production and then I hand it off to him to knock out the post-production.
Gotcha. Yeah, because that's a lot of work. 7 shows.
Oh yeah.
And in the Good Old Boys show, who did most of the
Mhm.
interviewing?
Mario did the bulk of the interviewing.
Mhm.
I would book the guest and I'd have his schedule handy and just pretty much make sure that I didn't overwork him.
Yeah.
And, and yeah, he would knock them out. His interviews were kind of short though. They were about 10 to 15 minutes
Right.
max.
Right.
We were still in the radio age, so you don't keep guests for 45 minutes to an hour on radio for 9 times out of 10. So it was pretty much 15 minutes, get to the gist of why they're coming on the show, because a lot of times it was related to a promo run.
Yep. So interesting, isn't it? The change between or the journey from broadcasting to now podcasting. What's your take on the difference and what do you like about podcasting now that is different to what it was?
Well, I mean, I'll say I love podcasting. I think the reason why I avoided for so long working at a radio station was because I felt like there was so much politics involved. You didn't have the freedom to say what you wanted to say and how you wanted to say it, or you had limitations on the guests that you could have, or even climbing the ladder. Like you had to set up tents for remotes and carry bags, and then there was never a guarantee that you would even get an on air spot, or you would have the midnight hour. So I avoided that, and I just continued on my own path and eventually snuck in through the back door with podcasting. Yeah, and with Good Old Boys, we were doing essentially the same thing. We just producing it in house, which was playing music, having lively discussions, getting the celebrity interviews, attending events, the whole nine. We were doing all of that as if we were working at a radio station. It's just that we were doing it while having other careers as
Yeah.
well.
And the technology now has become so good and so easy. You can set up your own home studio and even link up with other people so easily through the internet now. Like, do you guys, when you do the shows, do you do them all together in the same place or are you linking up via the internet as well?
It's completely remote at the moment because I'm in Florida.
Yeah.
Mario's in South Carolina, and Q and Gran Wiz, they're in North Carolina. I mean, it's hard, especially Q's a truck driver, so his availability is unpredictable, but we just find like an hour, hour and a half during the week, and we get together and knock out shows. Back in the day when we did the Good Old Boys, me and Gran Wiz lived about 20 minutes from each other. I was in Chapel Hill and he was in Raleigh, and we would commute together to Charlotte, and we would spend the weekend recording like multiple shows, like 3 or 4 shows. We'd stay in a hotel room. That Saturday night, get back up and hit the road Sunday morning, heading back home. It was a lot of sacrifices, but it was some of the best times, best experiences ever. Just hanging out, creatively expressing ourselves, and life obviously predicts creativity. I feel a lot of times people say it's the other way around, but yeah, whatever happened in life just spawned so much creativity back then.
I agree with that. It's probably a bit of both, but I definitely agree with that. A lot of the time, our creative state is dependent on what's happening around us.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I'd love to touch on your relationship with all you guys have been doing this for like 15 years together. How do you manage that? Is there any tension do you ever get sick of each other? How does that all work?
I think because we all live in different cities, I think that helps. It's almost like because we all have, I mean, we're adults, we have families. I think just being able to get together with your friends and shoot the breeze, like it's a relief in a lot of cases. Q and Mario, they have kids. It's just an opportunity it's like a stress reliever. And I'd say from my end, I don't really get tired of them as much as sometimes I get tired of the redundancy and in the topics that we cover.
Right.
And because if we're doing a lot of relationship shows and you're no longer out there dating,
Mm.
like you don't really have as much to add. It kind of comes from the perspective of being an OG and giving advice
Yep.
instead of like just being actively in the game.
Yeah.
You're kind of like a
You're in your
coach
own
or
journey. sharing your
Yeah,
own
you're a
story.
coach or a general manager type of a content provider.
Wow. So you guys are, sounds like you guys are touching all sorts of interesting topics.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's what keeps the show going is that we're versatile enough to go in any direction between the four of us. Like we all have particular characteristics. Like Q is kind of like the ladies man conspiracy theorist. He doesn't really follow what's going on in the world, so sometimes he comes across as naive and lost when we bring up current events. Gran Wiz, like we said, is the comedian, but he's never been in a serious relationship before. And
Yeah.
he's like frugal McDougal, very, very cheap. Mario is the person that never wants to travel, never wants to leave his home state,
All right.
and he works all the time. And I kind of compare him to Al Bundy, sort of. And then I'm the one like because I was creating a lot of the early shows, like my life experiences, like dating experiences, they were interesting. And they will say that I've had the wildest dating history of anyone they know.
Good.
But I mean, I'm also the type where I'm traveling and
Yeah.
just open minded. I'm probably the rational one out of the bunch. Just those four elements coming together just leads to interesting conversations, sometimes heated debates, but at the end, we just laugh and keep it moving. There's no animosity involved.
That's awesome. Sounds like a really interesting cocktail of personalities.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. And as you say, it's kind of a nice something to look forward to because you all have different lives, you're living in different areas, you've got different stages of your life. So it's actually something that you look forward to and you can keep in contact with each other and just have some fun and be in the moment again and kind of take you back to your childhood with the music as well.
Oh yeah. And then like when we go back and listen to the episodes as they release, which I was listening to this week's episode before we hopped on, and me and Mario, we were talking and just laughing at some of the comments because we did a show called Freezing Cold Takes
Right.
where we're talking about things or people that we dislike that is of unpopular opinion.
Right.
And you definitely want to check that out because we say some wild stuff in that episode.
I'm going to definitely have to get back and revisit a lot of your episodes and check them out. It's going to be, sounds like it's going to be fun. But I want to chat a bit more about how you guys manage opportunities outside of the show and how you balance things. So, because you're all doing so many different things, tell us a bit
Mhm.
more about, for example, what you do outside of the show.
All right. So I'll say my plan all along with all of the work that I've been doing with Forecast Media, with the Good Ole Boys and Stop, Look, and Listen was to use that as a springboard for other opportunities. You know what I mean? Because I'm highly protective of the content that we make with the Good Ole Boys, especially, and with Stop, Look, and Listen, that I don't want to sacrifice it for any payday. I don't want to sell it out.
Yep.
So I was like, I'd rather use some of the knowledge and skills and have people pay me for that than to sell out my creations.
Gotcha.
So about 3 years ago, I was working at UNC Chapel Hill and in the library world, and I felt like I was at a point where I can do this for a company full time and pretty much just put my resume together, put my portfolio together, and took that chance. And a tech company out of San Francisco, they were looking for somebody to help with their podcast. And I ended up getting the gig. It was crazy. I had to interview with somebody in India because the founders are from India.
Nice.
So I had interviews 3 mornings in a row. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh boy.
And I was half asleep, but I was still able to make a good enough impression. And we've knocked out 2 seasons of the Breaking Changes podcast, where we interview some of the top leaders in tech.
Yep.
And it's been a learning experience because creating podcast independently versus creating it for an enterprise is two completely different ball games. You have to go through a whole lot of hurdles to get a show out for a company that is public and on the verge of going, I mean, that's private on the verge of going public.
Yeah.
Like you have to get so many approvals,
Oof.
and it's a challenge a lot of times. It's completely different, but just being able to navigate and exist in both worlds it serves me on both ends because what I learn with breaking changes helps me with forecast media, and what I experiment with forecast media helps me with breaking changes. So
Yep.
it pretty much makes me a total package, I feel.
I really agree with that. I think that it's so great to be able to explore different things and different passions and different hobbies and side gigs. And a lot of people might say, oh, you're spreading yourself too thin. But I'm of the philosophy that the more you do, as long as you manage your time well enough, it gives you more creativity and more inspiration that cross fertilize each other
Oh, exactly.
big time.
And I think within our field, within podcasting, as you know, I mean, you're the pod father. So and you work with a lot of individuals and companies alike. So I mean, you know how to manage making sure you get everything done in that realm versus what you need to get done for your own brand.
Yep.
Like to me, it's just an innate ability. Honestly, I feel like we've been trained to do that. We've been trained to juggle our passions versus our professions.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of even when you reach that point where your passion and your profession intertwine, you still utilize those skills to have side hustles.
Definitely. I want to touch a bit more on what you just mentioned before as well, because it might be interesting for the audience. When you're working on a really important corporate podcast versus just an independent passion project and what we just mentioned, what do you
Mhm.
have to look at that's a little different? What do you have to be aware of? What do you have to really be careful of to not overstep the mark or etc.?
Well, budget. First and first and foremost, like everything it has to be documented. You have to write briefs and analysis and make your goals known. You have to work with a lot of different people. So like I work with an engineer, I work with a campaign strategist,
Wow.
I work with the head of the marketing team, I work with a social media person, I work with the creative team. They design all of the thumbnails, and we have to pay for music. We have to pay for voiceover artists. We have to get a corporate account for Riverside, which is like $20,000. I have to have meetings with the people from Riverside. I have to hire a transcription artist. I have to manage their process. I have to still book guests, have to communicate with the guests, have to write the questions out for the host, have to cut shorts and clips and pretty much give a rundown to the editor. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I
That's a
mean,
lot,
pretty much
man.
work with the technical writer to create blogs, and you give them the proper transcript or timestamps from the transcript. So it's
Oh, wow.
yes, it's a lot of stuff you have to deal with. Then
That's
at the end of the year, you have to meet with a social media person, which I mean, I didn't mention that. I have to send all of the descriptions to the social media person to post. But at the end of the year, you get the Hootsuite account and put together like a dashboard of metrics. That way it's showing that we're meeting our goals or we're not for YouTube, and Podbean is our hosting site, and LinkedIn and Twitter X. Like we have to show the views, the downloads, the impressions, the click through rates. It's a lot.
it gets
And
very granular and very everything's very measured.
exactly. And I'm not even hosting the show.
Yeah.
So just imagine if I was hosting the show as well.
That sounds like a
Yeah.
lot of work. I think I'll stick to my indie podcast. That sounds like too much work for me. Wow.
Yeah. But I mean, I get to attend a lot of the podcast conferences in the States and have trips to Barcelona and California. So I mean, it's cool. Like I said, it's a learning experience. A lot of those skills I can pivot and use for forecast media.
Absolutely. And what
Mhm.
are you finding actually with your finger on the pulse so directly with the podcast community around the world? What are you finding in terms of what's hot right now and what might be coming very soon?
I'll say every time I attend a conference, the interesting thing is the people that work for these major companies like Libsyn and like Spotify, companies like that, they're trying to pick my brain.
No way.
And you would think when you're attending these conferences, like they have everything figured out, like
Mhm.
YouTube and others, like they're trying to figure out what I'm learning from my perspective. Like they're
And
asking me, what
what
is
you need as
Postman?
well. Yeah.
Because you mean there's not a whole lot of difference now. I think they're saying that the music industry is pretty much in bed with tech. I mean, you can honestly say podcasting is in bed with tech.
Yep.
So they see somebody that works for a tech company, then their eyebrows raise and they're like, wow, a tech company has a podcast and they have someone here. Like, let me talk to him. I mean, I think there's just still a lot of feeling out because the podcasting industry is still in its infancy stage and everyone's just trying to gain an understanding of what works long term,
Mhm.
what the scope of things. Are we going to hire celebrities? Are we going to find the hottest influencer? Are we going to do interview based podcasts? Are we going to do narrative based podcasts? Are we going to do true crime story?
Yep.
Are we going to have football players or basketball players on shows talking about what happened in their most recent game? Like, everyone's trying to figure out what works, which to me is the best stage because although some people have received massive bags, massive deals, there's still a playing field for people like us where we can consistently do what we enjoy and make a reasonable living off of it.
Yeah. And it's great to hear that podcasting is still relatively in its infancy, even though it seems like it's really saturated. And a lot of people are not getting into podcasts because they think it's already oversaturated. But I think it still is in its infancy as a medium, and it's going to evolve and morph into so much more in the future.
Right. And I mean, I think people think that hopping on a microphone and talking is easy and then they quickly realize that it's not. Like you have to be prepared. Like even your system for putting out suspended animation where like you're running like a well-oiled machine. You know what you need from each guest and the preparation is sound and then it's just hopping on the microphone and going. Not everyone has that background with knowing how to prepare for a show and they just hop on the mic and talk.
Yeah.
And then after 4 or 5 episodes, they're like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. That's right. And it's got to, I really believe that there has to be a bit of a strategy involved. You still have to have lots of room for creativity and spontaneity, but you have to have some
Mm.
strategy and preparation behind it. Otherwise, it just goes off in a million tangents.
Exactly. Obviously, we both use AI and automate it somewhat, but even with that, you still have to use your intuition and also improvise and know how to control the flow of a conversation.
Yeah.
Like you can't have a robotic conversation and that show is going to continue to exist too long.
That's awesome. Now, I want to kind of double take and get back to your original show, The Good Ole Boys. How did that? I'd love to know kind of where you found the most success, in which parts of the world, or how did that distribution fall?
Oh, I mean, the UK without a doubt.
Really?
The UK loved us. And I love the UK. I feel they have this appreciation for old school music that is unparalleled. Yeah, we received like just so much love. We were on like 5 stations in the UK. And when we stopped doing the show for a while, we heard about it.
Oh,
We
wow.
heard
So
about
where
it
you
from
guys
them.
going?
Yeah.
What happened? What happened to the show?
Yeah, we took a break right around the pandemic. I'd say even before that, things happen in everyone's lives. And I would say it was almost a company wide shutdown. It wasn't just the Good Old Boys. We were only putting out maybe 2 or 3 of the shows at the time.
Hmm.
So that's when I created Stop, Look, and Listen, when we stopped doing the Good Old Boys
Wow.
for a while.
Yeah.
It wasn't any issues within the group. It was, like I said, life happened
Mm.
and we had obligations and it was hard. It was hard to figure out how to continue to record the show.
And what about community? How much does community play a role in everything you do with your podcasts?
Community is extremely important. I think that I'll say like we have people that suggest show topics and without that, I mean, I think sometimes the shows turn out good and sometimes it's hard to, I feel, get inside of their heads to where we can do justice based on their suggestion. But I mean, we've had some good shows that people outside of the crew have shared with us. And yeah, we need that. We need to hear we need those additional ears, eyes and ears in order to make everyone happy. Because I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I've reached a period where I had like a creative drought. And then Mario had a period where he was creatively exhausted. But I think that was the benefit of one, the community, and then having four people on the show is that when somebody else is just running on fumes creatively, then we can reach out and touch someone and get
Yeah.
and get their
Pass the
get
baton
their
for a little
input.
while. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. I'd love to explore that a bit. Like, what did you do personally to help you get back to your creative zone?
Honestly, I'm still not in it. So, like I was saying, the Good Old Boys has existed since January of 2010.
Wow.
Probably the first year of the show, Mario came up with most of the ideas.
Yep.
Then I was creatively on fire. I'd probably say the next 6 or 7 years, I came up with like 80% of the show topics.
Wow.
Then it was a period where it was myself and Mario collaboratively. And since we've returned over the last 2 years, it's primarily been Mario.
Mhm.
But the thing is, because I was so much on fire creatively, I probably have 50 or 60 shows that we haven't recorded yet that we can record.
Exactly.
We just have to update it. And I created those shows like 8 years ago.
Wow.
And we can probably still do those shows. And me and him had a conversation today about we're gonna probably start doing a live show, maybe 2 or 3 days a week.
Awesome.
And I was the one pretty much coming up with the concept for that. So I mean, maybe I'm getting it back. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
maybe it's
yeah.
starting to seep in again.
hmm But yeah, I did have a dry spot. And a lot of it is like just feeling like we've talked about everything there is to discuss. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to bring the show back. When we returned 2 years ago, I was like, "Dude, I don't have anything else to say. I feel like this show has run its course. I'm plugged in to stop, look, and listen. I'm enjoying these conversations with real people. I don't want to mix those two personas. I don't want to mix LeTroy Gardner, the host of Stop, Look, and Listen, and Black Trump or the Good Old Boys, because to me that doesn't jive. What I say on, I mean, I feel like I have an obligation to my audience. So LeTroy on Stop, Look, and Listen is to be the point guard and bring out the best in my guests. Black Trump on Stop, Look, and Listen is to be an asshole. So it's kind of like two different
Yeah,
personas, and
that's right.
I'm just now feeling comfortable being Black Trump again.
Yeah. It's almost like acting in a way. You're just playing a role, and as long as the audience knows that's what you're doing, because they hear the other side
Exactly.
as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Have you ever done any work with merchandising for the show?
We have merchandise. We haven't really put a lot of energy behind it. And it's the crazy thing because people say I'm like the one man catalog and like my fashion attire, my wardrobe is like enviable, but I haven't really put a whole lot of energy in helping to design any of the threads,
Yeah.
which I think if I did, we would be more successful with that.
It's a great opportunity to really take that goodwill and bring some merchandise into it as well.
Oh yeah.
And as you said, doing a live show, that'd be fantastic. Obviously, it'd be tricky to get to coordinate with all of you four, but doing a live tour, mate, where, you guys are moving around, that'd be incredible.
Well, with the live shows, we incorporate everybody in the company. So, say like if we're doing it on a Monday or Tuesday, whoever's available, 4 or 5 people is available, will hop
Yeah.
on. Then we do it on a Friday. Some of the people aren't available on weekends, but others can be, and they can knock it out. So, I think it'll also be a way of showcasing some of the other talent because the reason why it was supposed to be Gran Wiz or Wafiq as well on this conversation, we're probably the two most visible members of the network. Everybody else is kind of behind the scenes and never really show their face. So I think doing those live streams will be an opportunity to get everyone out there front and center.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah. Wow. Well, man, I commend you. Sounds like it's been a great journey, and you guys are still so passionate about what you do. And I love the concepts, and I love the way that you're exploring all these other areas as well, and letting podcasting be your vehicle to take you to new heights.
Exactly. And like you said in our interview on Stop, Look, and Listen, Like, I don't want to just interview musicians, or I don't want to just interview, just thinking of something random.
Whatever.
I don't want to just interview authors or entrepreneurs. Like, I have varied interests. I enjoy shopping. I enjoy watching TV. I enjoy traveling. So I want to be able to have conversations about all of those things. And I felt strategically that when I was doing Stop, Look, and Listen, that if I was able to have conversations with politicians and pastors and doctors and executives, tech leaders, that just opened me up to endless opportunities. Like, I can
Definitely.
show if a company that is looking, say a hospital is looking for someone to do their podcast, I can show them interviews with the doctors that I've had
Yeah.
on the show. If a comedy club is looking for someone to create content for them, I can show them interviews I've done with comedians. So I just felt like not limiting myself, which a lot of times people say, no, you should have a focused a direction, a limited scope
Yeah.
on the content that you produce. That way you can have defined audience. But that's where I disagree. And I went in my own path and was like, no, I just want to talk to people in all different realms and just see what comes from it.
Yeah. I'm exactly the same. I mean, I thought, you know what? I'm going to make my podcast a variety show. I don't
Hmm.
want to just talk about one thing. I don't want to sit in one niche because I probably wouldn't continue. I'd get bored.
Right. Exactly.
And as
And
you
it
mentioned,
doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to get bored. Like, I, especially with us using Podmatch, I've been interviewing so many life coaches. Like, I'm tired of talking to life coaches. And so I'm just denying, I'm turning them down now. Like, whenever a life coach comes across my profile, I'm like, nope, not interested.
yeah, because also part of being a podcast host is really being in the moment and learning as well and being curious. And
Hmm.
with a variety of guests that are from different areas, you can really learn so much. Otherwise, you've already heard it all before 100 times.
Right. I've always, told people, like, I prepare for interviews and we'll pull bios and I'll take questions from the bio. I'll take questions from just my curiosity or what's going on in current events. And I just mix all of those up. And then I'll listen based on the conversation and ask questions on the fly. To me, that's how you do an interview.
Yep.
But a lot of times people don't use the curiosity. Like, to me, those are the best questions. Like, when you just ask whatever you're thinking and it'll catch the other person off guard, but
Yeah.
you get the best answers that way.
Yeah. And it's
So,
so much more organic as well because it's not scripted.
mhm,
Yeah, so
exactly.
I think it's important to have a framework, but to be as spontaneous and free in that framework.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of but I love that. So true, man. So any other plans for the near future? That's any other projects or plans that we haven't heard about yet?
All right. So, I mean, I've also been working on the production side of the Black Fashion History podcast this current season. The host, Taniqua Martin, she wanted to focus on fashion in Africa. So we released the first episode about a week ago. And I think there's 8 more episodes tied to this season. So that was another learning experience as well. So being in a contracted role and having the host and this person knows what they want, and then you're pretty much just a hired gun to help them execute.
Yeah.
So it's totally different from what I do with forecast media and completely different from what I do with breaking changes. But like I said, they're all learning experiences and just continuing to make those connections and explore content that I enjoy.
Yeah, seems like it. Man, sounds like you're doing a lot of things at the same time. My God. That's a lot of shows.
I need a break, huh?
Ooh, you need a holiday.
Oh yeah.
Well, LeTroy, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. Really, really enjoyed talking to you. Such a raw and natural conversation. And obviously, you're a very talented host yourself. So you're used to being free and communicating in that way. Anywhere that the audience can find more about you guys, any place that they should look.
Okay, so you can find all of our shows. I'll just give a quick rundown
Yes,
of
sir.
the programs. So on Mondays, you'll hear Stop, Look, and Listen, hosted by myself. Tuesday, the Good Ole Boys with myself, Mario Washington, Q Kittles, and Gran Wiz. Wednesday, you get The Unemployment Line with Doc and Larry P. On Thursdays, Throw Up Tackle with D. Mario Washington, Doc, and Little John. Friday, you get Giant Robot Radio with Big Daddy Suede. Saturdays, you get the Rainbow Bridge with Ann Murder. And you also get the Good Ole Boys radio show on radio stations. Just check our website, www.pushplaypods.com. Look for us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Forecast Media Network. You can find me on social media, One Man Catalog, and Breaking Changes is postman.com/breaking changes.
Man, that's a lot of stuff. That's great. Wow.
And it's all muscle memory.
You've done this before.
Yep.
Well, man, I commend you. That sounds like you really you've developed something very sophisticated, and it's obviously working for you and gaining traction all the time. So well done. That's awesome. Great to hear.
All right. So when you need a co-host, you know where to find me.
You bet. Well, LeTroy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, man. We'll have you back again. I really enjoyed that. I always like to leave my host with the last word. So anything that you'd like to leave us with?
All right, man. So like I said before, Darren, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Like we said, you've been on Stop, Look, and Listen. We had an amazing time. And Suspended Animation Podcast, no different. To everybody that is on the fence about doing a podcast, jump into it. Everyone has a story. Feel free to share yours. Make your mistakes. It's okay. Yep. We're all in this together. We're learning. Like I said, these major companies like Libsyn and Spotify, they don't have the answers either. Why would we expect you to have the answer? So let's all hop on and make magic together.
So true. Absolutely love that, man. Absolutely love that. Yep. Well, man, I wish you guys the best of luck. I'll certainly be checking out some of your stuff, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
All right, man. Good talking to you as always.
Well done. Well, everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Check out all the links in the show notes that I'm going to put in. And I'll see you guys very, very soon for our next episode, Playing with Perspective, the Suspended Animation Podcast. Bye for now. Thanks, Troy.
Thank you, Darren.
Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Playing with Perspective, the Suspended Animation Podcast. If you would like to join me as a guest on the show, I would be delighted to collaborate. Just reach out via www.suspendedanimation.com.au. Also, remember to click on the link in the show notes for loads of great podcasting resources, webinars, courses, and opportunities to help you on your podcast journey. Many of them free. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.